I'm going to start today with the big topic of the week, which is abortion legislation in New South Wales. Now, I have given my extended thoughts on that legislation and the issue of abortion in general in the last episode. So if you haven't seen that one, go back now. You can go to our YouTube channel. All the episodes are there. You can go playlists and go Truth of It full episodes, or even the Truth of It clips, where you can just get the abortion clip from the last episode or watch the full thing. It's the second topic that I deal with. If you're podcasting, you can also go back to the previous episode. Those are my extended thoughts on the abortion issue. Also subscribe, by the way, to YouTube while you're there, because it all goes up on YouTube, and we're aiming to get 10,000 subscribers very, very soon. That's gone up very rapidly, and it's increasing quickly, so get in on it. But I've given my extended thoughts there, and what I want to do now is hone in on something, because since I did that piece, the bill has actually passed the lower house of the New South Wales Parliament, and you know that. But maybe what a lot of people don't know is that during the debate on the bill in the lower house of the New South Wales Parliament, a whole range of amendments were moved, changes to make this dreadful law a little bit better, and there's some pretty solid ones here. Most of them were moved by Tanya Davies, MP, the MP for Mulgoa. I think that's right. Is it Mulgoa? Yes. And each of these amendments was voted down, rejected by the upper house. You say, well, what were they? Well, unfortunately, this is pretty depressing stuff. The first one, which is of tremendous significance, is that an amendment to ensure babies that are born alive are rendered medical care. That is, the same neonatal care that would be afforded any other child born at the relevant stage of gestation. If it were a wanted child, if the mother had made the designation that, yes, I want to keep it, medical care would be rendered. And the Parliament said, no. Babies born alive as a result of botched abortion procedures must be left to die. You say, is that really an issue? Well, yes, in Victoria between 2009 and 2016, there were 304 babies born alive during an abortion process left to slowly die on operating tables, rendered no care. In Western Australia between 1999 and 2015, at least 26 babies were born alive after failed abortion attempts. They too were left to die. Gemma Tognini writes in the Daily Telegraph, an amendment to provide medical care to babies that survived abortions was somehow voted down. Voted down. Say that aloud if you dare. A baby born alive who needs medical help is left to die. My heart breaks. This actually happens right across the country. It's very hard to get the stats, but we have two states there. One that's highly populated with liberal abortion laws, one that's less populated with less liberal abortion laws. It's happening across the country. These babies will continue to die in criminally inhumane, wicked circumstances simply by being left on the operating table and not being rendered any care. Second amendment that was voted down was an amendment to require that abortions performed on children under 16 are reported to the relevant authority, and the Parliament said no. They voted against it. So a pregnant minor may seek an abortion and no investigation is made regarding possible child sexual abuse. It's not even brought to the attention of any authority. The bill in its current form contains provisions for overruling, in fact, the wishes of parents when an abortion is requested by their child, a minor. And we know that girls who abort, rather than carry a pregnancy to term, are 5 times more likely to seek help for psychological problems thereafter, 3 times more likely to report trouble sleeping, 9 times more likely to report marijuana use. But no, they wouldn't allow an amendment into this bill that would require a doctor to make a report when a child, a girl under 16, comes in for an abortion. Thirdly, an amendment to allow counselling and a 72-hour cooling off period for any woman seeking an abortion. That too was voted down. You say, why would you go to allow counselling? Well, because women in circumstances that have led them to seek an abortion are often facing grave challenges. It is true that very many women don't have an abortion for choice. It is true. And an independent counsellor in those circumstances and challenges may actually be rather helpful. 3-month post-abortive women, we know, have a 3.5 times greater incidence of clinical depression and 1/5 higher rates of post-traumatic stress disorder. That's not just some random fringe study. You look at the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, they recommend this: a woman's physical, social, emotional and psychological needs should be taken into account in the course of decision making, and pre- and post-termination counselling by appropriately qualified professionals should be made available. Why? Because it's more than just a medical procedure. Why? Because it's not just removing a clump of cells. Why? Because there's something psychological that takes place when a woman kills a child, when a woman's motherhood instinct is truncated and cut short, and the child is taken away. There's psychological impacts. The activists tell us it's not significant. It is significant. Or if you want anecdotal evidence, there was the case of Kathy Clubb, which taught me a great deal. Kathy Clubb went to the High Court. Why? Because in Victoria, she stood near a East Melbourne abortion clinic and she made simple offers of help to women who were approaching that clinic. And Kathy, in the course of her ministry, saw more than 300 babies born alive because of the interventions of her and others doing the same ministry as her as part of a group called the Helpers. These women often had a trouble, had a doubt, had a concern about what they were doing. But there was a problem that drove them to it. Sometimes it was domestic violence and coercion, needed help. Sometimes it was that they were poverty-stricken, bankrupt, needed help. Sometimes it was that they'd been deserted and left alone in the world and had no friends or support, needed help. Sometimes it was that they did not know how they were going to care for that child and raise it as an infant, needed help. Help can be provided to women who find themselves in these circumstances, and abortion is not the answer. An amendment to permit conscientious objection by doctors was also voted down. We know the law as it currently stands says that a doctor, regardless of faith, regardless of religious conviction, regardless of their conscience, must be complicit in abortion, must either perform the abortion or refer the patient, the woman, to someone who definitely will. Now, anybody with a Christian faith or anything like that knows that is to be complicit. The doctor's right of integrity of his conscience is taken away. Now, this is deeply harmful to a person. To have them required by law to do something that infringes upon, that wounds, that harms their conscience, that inflicts them with guilt is very serious. And people simply won't do this. But if they're sanctioned for it, it will drive them from the medical profession. How wrong it is not to take conscience seriously. And because the Parliament thinks it's a good idea, because the Parliament wants to impose this law, the Parliament now wants every doctor to be complicit and to affirm and applaud it through their practice. A reasonable amendment to permit the most basic of freedoms, the freedom of the mind and the conscience and the belief, rejected, voted down. An amendment to make it an offence to coerce someone into having an abortion. Believe it or not, in an age of domestic violence concerns, that too was voted down. Do you know a Galaxy poll was done in Queensland a while ago of the general public and it asked abortion-related questions, and I can scarcely believe this. This was a pretty big poll by a reputable company. Of those asked in the Queensland community, living, breathing, walking Queenslanders, 26%, more than a quarter of people reported knowing someone who has been coerced into having an abortion by another person. I find that astonishing. 2 high-profile footballers recently had former girlfriends come out and say, we were coerced by this person. One was paid hush money to go and have abortions. Both regretted it, both spoke out. Now, I note that neither of those footballers have been banned for life, unlike a certain someone else who did the terrible sin of speaking up for his beliefs. But what happened to domestic violence concerns? This was voted down. Do you know an amendment, speaking of domestic violence, speaking of women and, the things that are done to them, women's rights, an amendment to ban sex selection abortion was voted down. Now, some cultures we know prefer male children. That is widely known. It's recently been documented that in an area of India covering 132 villages, there have been no girls born for 3 months. Now, that's not a demographic anomaly. It can't be. It's a result of targeted sex selection abortions. You say, well, that's in India, in these villages. No. Actually, that's a convenient belief to confine it to other countries, but there's been a study conducted by La Trobe University and it notes that there are far fewer girls being born into certain ethnic communities in Australia, demonstrating that sex selection abortion does occur in Australia. It's interesting, I had a guy come to my place to fix my NBN connection the other day, and we got talking about the New South Wales abortion laws because he asked me what I did. And he was telling me, he's an Indian guy, and he was saying, look, in some provinces where he's from, I haven't verified this, but he told me that actually they've banned doctors from disclosing the sex of the child to parents for fear that girls will be aborted because it's been such a problem, which he says is getting less. And I told him, I said, well, do you know the New South Wales law, it allows sex selection abortions. In fact, they voted down an amendment to prohibit sex selection abortions. And his eyes went as wide as saucers, and he said to me, I don't believe you. And so we had to talk about it further, but it shows how outrageous this is, that now we're actually going to learn from these places in India on sex selection who actually made a step to prevent it, whereas we're making a step to facilitate it. Do you know Melbourne doctor Mark Hobart was disciplined by the Medical Board of Victoria when he was accused of having committed an offence under that state's abortion law, very much the same as the New South Wales one we're talking about. He was accused of committing an offence because a patient and her husband requested a sex selection abortion after an ultrasound determined that their child was female. They wanted a boy, and so they asked Dr. Hobart to abort the child. And I don't have the information here, but it was not very early in the pregnancy, let's put it that way. I can't remember the exact number of weeks. I think it was 20-something, but it was well along. Anyway, it was along the pregnancy some way. Now, under Victorian law, as under this law, the doctor is obliged to refer the patient to someone who will do it. Dr. Mark Hobart declined, said he had a conscientious objection and he couldn't refer for that purpose. They took him to the medical board, and the medical board did, in fact, discipline him, but the doctor who did the sex selection abortion was not disciplined in any way. Nature magazine says some 45 million girls worldwide were never born because of the use of sex-selective abortions during the past half-century. China and India account for the vast majority of these missing girls, with 23.1 million and 20.7 million respectively. But an amendment to prevent sex selection abortions, daughter slaughter as some have come to call it, someone being killed because they're a girl in the womb, voted down. Now, there's an argument out there that says, well, will it all make a difference anyway? I mean, in New South Wales, it may well be right now that abortion is in the criminal code, but that doesn't actually stop people getting abortions. People are getting it anyway. The practice doesn't match the law. Really, what this law is doing is bringing things up to current standards. Is that true? Well, Associate Professor Joanna Howe and Professor Suzanne Lim-Meyer of the University of Adelaide Law School have written this. They said the New South Wales bill is based on the Queensland model, which in turn was based on the Victorian laws. So the situation in that state is a relevant case study. Since abortion was decriminalised in Victoria in 2008, post-20-week abortions have increased by, wait for it, 39%. In Victoria, in 2011, for example, an abortion was carried out at 37 weeks, and 10 healthy, viable babies of healthy mothers between 28 and 31 weeks gestation were also aborted for, wait for it, psychosocial reasons. In Victoria, between 2009 and 2016, there were 304 babies who were born alive in the abortion process who were left to die on the operating table. There is no doubt late-term abortions will increase in New South Wales under this liberalised law. Not only that, but all the atrocities that go with it. Babies born alive and left to die. Note the Victorian figure is over 300 babies born alive and left to die in Victoria. But in WA, where the same extremely liberal law doesn't exist, it was only about 30. It makes a difference. Sex selection abortions, doctors taken to the medical board for conscientious objection, who knows what. Children under the age of 16 seeking abortions. It all goes up. Do you know what? Sometimes I finish these sections by having some positive note. I'm not going to do it on this one. And I'm not going to do it on this one because I want it to sit. I want the gravity and the seriousness of this just to sit. Because I think we all need a bit of negativity in our lives sometimes. And this is a moment. Because I fear that many Australian Christians are naive about where our society is at. We have no sense, or limited sense, of just how bad things are. We have no sense of how people have forgotten God. How brazen, how deliberate, how knowingly, how carelessly otherwise respectable people are committing this grave evil with no conscience about it. Passing laws that facilitate and permit the things we've described, quite apart from what I said last week, and they don't mind. And so many of us are watching evil unfold. And not only do some of us not see the extent of it, but there's others that, and I'll never understand this, feel no outrage about it. They feel no grief about it. They're not crying out to God for mercy or for judgment. They're not motivated enough to act, to speak, to condemn this, to say something. We need to understand how far we've come. Because the sooner we face it, the sooner we will do as we are called to do in dark times. And that is to shine the light in the darkness by doing good. That is to remain uncompromised in our Christian integrity and character and action despite the pressure. That is to stop committing the sin of silence despite the hostility. And that's a big one, too many silent people. And also to be not ashamed, as Paul says in Romans 1, of Christ and his gospel, even though the world around us is telling us to be ashamed. Because, as time goes on, the more I am convinced that there is no other place. And we go to false sources all the time, but there's actually no other place in which the power of God for salvation is revealed to all people.